Hello and welcome to MBKM Models. Today we're going to talk about PT-109, but before we do that, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe and follow for more great aircraft documentaries and model build videos. Right, we're going to crack straight in. Patrol Torpedo Boat PT-109 was an 80-foot Elco PT boat, which is Patrol Torpedo Boat, last commanded by Lieutenant John F. Kennedy, the then future United States President, in Solomon Islands campaign of the Pacific Theater during World War II. Kennedy's actions in saving his surviving crew after PT-109 was rammed and sunk by a Japanese destroyer made him a war hero. Back problems stemming from the incident required months of hospitalization at Chelsea Naval Hospital and plagued him for the rest of his life. Kennedy's post-war campaigns for elected office referred often to his service with PT-109. Let's have a look at specifications. Hubert Scott Payne of the British Power Company had developed air-sea rescue fast motorboats in the UK. He took his PT boat to Elco in 1939 and there was a shortage of suitable engines in the UK. At the outbreak of war, British Powerboat Company continued production of his designs in Britain. Throughout the hostilities, the sea-keeping quality of the boats and ease of construction matched to the available Packard engines made at perfect combination. PT-109 was an 80-foot, 40-ton MTB, one of hundreds built by the firm between 1942 and 1945 in New Jersey. Let's go through now and have a look at armament. Okay, the PT boat's principal offensive weapon was her torpedoes. She was fitted with 4 21-inch torpedo tubes containing Mark 8 torpedoes. They weighed 3,150 pounds each, with a 386-pound warhead, and gave the tiny boat a punch believed at the time to be effective against armoured ships. The Mark 8, however, was both inaccurate and ineffective until its detonator was recalibrated by the Navy at the end of the war. A major issue that was, even in the unlikely instance they hit their target, they rarely detonated, even when they hit at a 90-degree angle perpendicular to their target. Also noteworthy was that the torpedoes were slow, travelling only at 28 knots, thoroughly unable to catch faster moving Japanese vessels. In contrast, the Japanese Type 93 destroyer torpedo, later called the Long Lance, was faster at 45 knots, had an accurate range of 20,000 yards, and was far more powerful with 1,000 pounds of high explosives, and unlike the Mark 8, its detonator usually worked when it hit a target. So let's have a look at the early operations of PT-109. PT-109 was transported from Norfolk Navy Yard to the South Pacific in August 1942 on board the Liberty ship SS Joseph Stanton. Originally navy grey, it's believed the ship was painted a flat dark green at New Caledonia after being offloaded. She arrived in the Solomon Islands late in the same year and was assigned to Motor Torpedo Boat Station 2 on Lagi Island. She participated in combat operations around Guadalcanal from the 7th of December 42 to the 2nd of February 43, when the Japanese withdrew from the island. The Battle of Blackett Strait. At the end of July 1943, reports were received and decoded by the naval authorities at Kennedy's PT base on Rendova Island, indicating that 5 enemy destroyers were scheduled to run the night of the 1st to the 2nd of August. The destroyers would cruise from the Solomons, Bougainville Island, through Blackett Strait to supply provisions and bring troops to the Japanese garrison on Vila Plantation on Kolombangara Island's southern tip. America's sophisticated deciphering of the Japanese naval codes had contributed to the victory at the Battle of Midway 10 months earlier, and the same technology had been used to break their code and provide reports of the Japanese destroyers expected on the 1st to the 2nd of August. Despite the recent loss of 2 boats and 2 crewmen from a Japanese air attack, the skippers of PT-109 and 14 other boats met with Commander Thomas Warfield to discuss details of a mission to head north through a cut in the reefs known as the Ferguson Passage to Blackett Strait between Gizo Kolombangara Islands to block or attack the anticipated enemy destroyers. The resulting skirmish, sometimes referred to as the Battle of Blackett Strait, should not be confused with an earlier battle there on the 3rd of March 43. Arleigh Burke had the northern approach to Kolombangara with 7 American destroyers to ensure the Japanese were prevented from reinforcing their garrison, though he was not on station until 12:30 a.m. All 4 Japanese destroyers would evade his grasp as they arrived an hour early before Burke had reached his post. The resultant battle would become the largest use of PT boats in the war, and the results would not be promising for the future use of PTs against Japanese destroyers. Separation of PT-109 from her division. Lieutenant Brantingham of PT-159, leader of Kennedy's division and originally stationed near Kennedy, first saw radar blips indicating the southbound destroyers just arriving on the scene and fired his torpedoes about a mile away. As he advanced, he did not radio PT-109 to follow, leaving Kennedy and his crew behind in the darkness. All of Brantingham's torpedoes missed the destroyers, and his torpedo tubes caused a small fire, requiring Lieutenant Liebenau's PT, also in Kennedy's division, to swing in front of Brantingham's PT to block the light emitting from his burning torpedoes, as they could have given away their location to the destroyers. Liebenau's 157 fired 2 torpedoes that failed to hit their target as well. Then both boats laid smoke from their smoke generator and zigzagged away to avoid detection. No signal of the destroyer's presence was ever radioed or received to PT-109 or the other boat in the division, and skippers Brantingham and Liebenau headed blindly west to Gizo Island and away from the destroyers and PT-109. Many of the torpedoes that were fired exploded prematurely or ran at the wrong depth. The odds that a Mark 8 would explode was less than 50% due to faulty calibration of the detonators, a problem that was not made nor corrected by the Navy until later in the war. A few other PTs, including the leader of Division A to the south of Kennedy, intercepted the destroyers on their southbound route, close to Kolombangara, but were unable to hit any with torpedoes. The boats were radioed by Warfield to return when their torpedoes were expended, but the 4 boats with radar fired their torpedoes first and were ordered to return to base. Commander Warfield's concept of sending orders to the PTs in darkness by radio from 40 miles away and without a view of the battle was inefficient at best. The radar sets the 4 boats carried were relatively primitive and sometimes malfunctioned. When the 4 boats with radar left the scene of the battle, the remaining boats, including PT-109, were deprived of the ability to determine the location or approach of the oncoming destroyers and were not notified that other boats had already engaged the enemy. Late in the night, PT-109 and 2 accompanying PTs became the last to sight the Japanese destroyers, returning to their northern route to Rabaul, New Guinea, after they had completed dropping their supplies and troops at 1:45 a.m. on the southern tip of Kolombangara. The official Navy account of the incident listed radio communications as good, but PT commanders were also told to maintain radio silence until informed of enemy radio sightings, causing many commanders to turn off their radios or not closely monitor their radio traffic, including Kennedy. Collision with the Amagiri, 2nd of August. By 2 a.m. on the 2nd of August 43, as the battle neared its end, PT-109, PT-162 and PT-169 were ordered to continue patrolling the area on orders previously radioed from Commander Warfield. The night was cloudy and moonless, and fog had set amidst the remaining PTs. Kennedy's boat was idling on one engine to avoid detection of her phosphorescent wake by Japanese aircraft when the crew realized they were in the path of the Japanese destroyer Amagiri, which was heading north to Rabaul from Vila Plantation, Columbangara, after offloading supplies and 902 soldiers. Contemporary accounts of the incident, particularly the work of Mark Doyle, do not often find Kennedy at fault for the collision. The lack of speed and manoeuvrability caused by the idling engines of PT-109 put the ship at risk from passing destroyers, but Kennedy had not been warned by radio of destroyers in the area. Kennedy believed the firing he heard was from shore batteries on Columbangara, not destroyers, and that he could best avoid detection by enemy seaplanes by idling his engines and reducing his weight. Kennedy said he attempted to turn PT-109 to fire a torpedo and have Ensign George Barney Ross fired our newly installed 37mm anti-tank gun from the bow of the oncoming northbound destroyer Amagari. Ross lifted a shell but did not have time to load it into the close breech of the weapon that Kennedy hoped might deter the oncoming vessel. Amagari was travelling at a relatively high speed of between 23 and 40 knots in order to reach harbour by dawn when Allied air patrols were likely to appear. Kennedy and his crew had less than 10 seconds to get the engines up to speed and invade the oncoming destroyer, which was advancing without running lights, but the PT boat was run down and severed between Columbangara and Gizo Island. PT-109 was struck on her starboard side at a 20-degree angle, shearing off a piece of the boat. Conflicting statements have been made as to whether the destroyer captain had spotted and steered towards PT-109 with the intention of ramming her, or tried to avoid her at the last minute. Most contemporary authors write that Amagiri's captain, Lieutenant Commander Koei Hanami, intentionally steered to collide with PT-109. Hanami later admitted it himself and also stated that PT-109 was travelling at a steady pace in their direction. PT-109 explodes. When PT-109 was cut in two around 2:27 a.m, a fireball of exploding aviation fuel, 100-foot high, caused the sea surrounding the ship to flame. Seaman Andrew Jackson Kirksey and Harold William Marney were killed instantly, and 2 other members of the crew were badly injured and burned when they were thrown into the flaming sea surrounding the boat. For such a catastrophic collision, explosion and fire, there were few men lost compared to the losses on other PT boats hit by shellfire. PT-109 was gravely damaged with watertight compartments, keeping only the forward hull afloat in a sea of flames. PT-169, closest to Kennedy's craft, launched 2 torpedoes that missed the destroyer, and PT-162 torpedoes failed to fire at all. Both boats then turned away from the scene of the action and returned to base without checking for survivors of PT-109. There had been no procedure outlined by Commander Warfield of how to search for survivors or what the PT flotilla should do in case a ship was lost. In the words of Captain Robert Bulkley, naval historian, this was perhaps the most confused and least effectively executed action the PTs had been in. 8 PTs fired 30 torpedoes. The only confirmed results were the loss of PT-109 and damage to the Japanese destroyer Amagiri. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and until next time.